Hello and welcome back to The Report. Israeli negotiators arrived in Cairo this morning for talks on ending the month-old war in Gaza. This comes after a new 72-hour truce was brokered by Egypt. In a month of violence, Israel has killed over 1,900 Palestinians while devastating wide tracts of the densely populated Gaza Strip. 67 Israelis have also lost their lives. Sarah CA now brings us this report from the weekend's pro-Gaza rally in London.
Preparations for the national demonstration in support of the people of Gaza began early on Saturday. Organisers, which included the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Stop the War Coalition and Friends of Al-Aqsa, called for this to be the largest demonstration ever held in the UK in solidarity with the people of Gaza. The protest against the continuing assault on Palestinians began outside BBC Broadcasting House in central London.
The BBC has been criticised of its coverage of the Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, with accusations that the news corporation's coverage has been devoid of context or background. Now, I'm here with Hugh Lanning, who is the chair of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Now, your organisation, wrote a letter to the Director General, Lord Hall. Did you get a response for that letter?
Just a token one-line reply, but not a proper response to the criticisms that we raised. So that's why we thought we'd bring the demonstration here. They might cover it then.
And how do you feel about their coverage over the last few weeks? Has it changed at all?
It's got better in terms of information, but it actually hasn't got any better about the context. I was on the BBC and said you'd never mention the occupation, who's the Palestinian spokespeople you talk to, there's no equivalent to Mark Regev, and so everyone would think this started a few weeks ago, whereas actually it's been going on for decades.
And what do you think about the fact that they've started to show the humanitarian appeal on the BBC, which they haven't done before?
It's hypocrisy, really. They refused to do it when Israel invaded in 2009 with Operation Cast Lead. Now, because Israel, who's caused the massacre, is saying it's okay, they're going ahead with the appeal. So really what they should do is be consistent. This has always been a major humanitarian cause for which they should show support. It shouldn't rely on the people who caused the damage saying, yes, you can have a collection for it.
The protesters marched from BBC Broadcasting House in central London towards Hyde Park, sending a clear message to the UK government on what their opinion was.
I'm just here basically, just like everybody else, we just want to open our mouth and speak up against the injustice that's happening all around the world. It's not just Palestine, it's everywhere, but right now Palestine is in the limelight. And if our voice is the only thing that we can use, we will use it. And it's a basic thing everyone should be doing.
The reason I'm standing here is to stop the occupation, is to stop this illegal apartheid, this criminality which has killed thousands of innocent people. Children are dying every single day, and we're here to make a difference, we're here to make a change.
The protesters arrived in Hyde Park for the rally, which included speeches by well-known activists and public figures, part of a growing number who have started to speak out against the attacks on Gaza.
This demonstration is the largest one we've had in this country over the question of Gaza or over the Palestinians. We reckon there's 150 to 200,000 people here. It's absolutely huge outpouring of anger at the role of Israel in Gaza, and it's not just the last events of the last few weeks, but the events going back years and years and years, right to 1948. And so I think it is the beginning of a very, very big movement, which goes beyond saying we don't want the killing to an ending of the siege, the question of an arms embargo, boycott. All these things are now on the agenda, and I think they're going to be very, very important. And when people say demonstrations don't make a difference, we should be aware. David Cameron will know exactly how big this demonstration was. The government knows. They know from all the letters and the lobbying and all the things they're getting. But this is getting people on the streets and saying, we are the majority in this country. It's a huge movement now, and we're going to keep going until we win justice for the Palestinians.
Today, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets here in London in support of the people in Gaza. But whether or not those in power will be listening is what they'll be waiting to hear over the coming weeks. Sarah Say, Islam Channel.
Well, now I'm joined in the studio by Ben Jamal from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which organised Saturday's demonstration, and also Nasim Ahmed from the Middle East Monitor. Welcome to you both. Now, of course, the BBC maintain that they are providing impartial coverage. And I guess, Ben, one thing you must be pleased about was that on the main news on Saturday night, for the first time, there was a decent coverage of that demonstration.
Yeah, as you say, probably for the first time. I think previous demonstrations, and this was a particularly large demonstration, about 150,000 people. We've had previous demonstrations almost as large. Cast-led, we had over 100,000 people out on the streets. At that time, minimal coverage from the BBC. So it's a positive that they're actually showing this. My sense is they're on the back foot. In a sense, they were given very little choice but to show it because of the fact that it's been covered more broadly. I think other main broadcast outlets like Channel 4 have given very fair coverage, and the BBC's been subject to a huge amount of criticism across the spectrum for its coverage in this situation. OK,
Nasim, now one of the things that people were said to be critical of the mainstream coverage in that package was that they didn't cover the kind of origins and background of this war, that they treated as if it just started last week. So let's not make the same mistake. What is, in your mind, the sort of core issue, the historical issue here?
Well, the historical issue, of course, goes back to 1940 and the 1967 occupation of Palestine, the West Bank, but more recently the siege and the blockade of Gaza, which started from 2006. Of course, we can go back to 1940 and say the issues are the refugees issue is the occupation. But more recently, I would say the main issue is the blockade, which is an act of war itself, the siege, which is an act of war itself. So Gaza specifically has been in a state of war. And the levels of violence goes up and down since 2006. But effectively, the Palestinians are living under a state of occupation, a state of war, even though Israel has withdrawn its troops and its settlements. So when people say Palestinians in Gaza are throwing rockets, are launching rockets consistently, but the BBC and most of the media, even Channel 4 to an extent, had failed to address the fact that Palestinians have been living under a siege, living under a bombardment, living under a blockade. And this is the basic background which many of our media failed to actually address. And that's not going back to the bigger issues, which is the refugees, which is the settlements, which is the occupation in the West Bank. And there's a tendency, I think, where most of the media seem to address Gaza in isolation. This is a Palestinian issue. This is the issue for the Palestinian self-determination. So simply saying Gaza is no longer under occupation, it's not true. Palestine is under occupation. These are Palestinians, and it's their right to defend themselves against occupation, against illegal settlements in the West Bank. So people in Gaza, the Palestinians in Gaza, have just as much right to fight against the occupation in West Bank, even though they're living in Gaza. They're not two different enclaves. They are both Palestine, and this is something which the media tries to
well, Ben,
divide.
That's an interesting point because, of course, you know, the Palestinian movement has been divided between supporters of Fatah and the supporters of Hamas in Gaza. And some commentators say that it was precisely the fact that for the first time in a long time these two forces were together in a joint Palestinian government that triggered the current Israeli offensive. Do you think that's true?
I think it's certainly an element of truth in that. I mean, I'd echo what Nasim said. You have to look at the broad and long-term historical context. And in terms of, if you look at what motivates Israel's actions, it's its belief of the right to control Palestinian lives and to continue to exercise illegitimate power and control over Palestinian lives. Then in specific situations, specific actions, specific aspects of that control might be motivated by particular issues. So I think it is true to say what motivated Israel in the aftermath of the kidnapping of the 3 Israeli teenagers, to blame Hamas for that, to detain, not fully arrest, because they weren't charged, over 500 Hamas activists in the West Bank, to kill 9 Palestinians in the West Bank. All of that, it seems, is likely was motivated by attempt to destabilise the unity government. We know that part of Israel's tactic is to divide and rule, and it is opposed to any sense of unity amongst Palestinian factions.
Nasim, let me put you to the question because it's always put to people who are making the case for the Palestinians that Israel has the right to defend itself, and that this is as one radio interviewer I heard this morning put it, that the forces of Hamas are the aggressor. What's your response to that line of argument?
Well, when people say that, I don't think it's true to say Israel has a right, may have a right to defend itself. It's a state, it will say that, and most of our population will support that. But it does not have a right to defend occupation. And the issue at stake here is not the right of Israel to defend itself, it's the right of Israel to defend the occupation. This is what it's doing. Hamas is not posing an existential threat, as Israel claims. It's been abiding, it's been living under a siege. There's hardly any weapons going into Gaza, which can actually threaten the third, fourth largest military force in the world. There's no way Hamas is an existential threat. And most of the Palestinians in the West Bank have, in a sense, accepted the peace process. And even Hamas has accepted the peace process. And if Israel was to accept Palestinian reconciliation, unity, then, as some people say, Israel fears Hamas peace offensive more than the Hamas rockets. Why? Because when Hamas becomes part of the political process, it has no way of saying Hamas are the terrorists. Hamas are the ones who are throwing a spanner into the peace process. They're not. Palestinians have more or less accepted the international consensus on a two-state solution, including Hamas, and Israel cannot have that. And it cannot use that as an excuse to keep its forces and its settlements within the West Bank and maintain its
Jamal,
ongoing
do you think that's
annexation.
true, though? Because some opinion polls, certainly among Palestinians, show something like 60 or 70% who actually don't accept the two-state solution. And some of the critics, who are the friends of the State of Israel, are saying that your actions are going so far here that you're actually destroying the possibility of that solution, and in a way making a more radical proposal lie on the table as the only remaining proposal.
Well, I mean, the PSC's position is we don't have a position on a one-state or two-state solution. It's our judgment that that's for the Palestinian people to decide. What we are clear about is that any solution, be it one state, be it two states, be it any type of federal solution that some people have suggested, needs to recognise the equal rights of all citizens of the region. And that includes, I would say, if there's a two-state solution, that includes looking at the situation of Palestinian citizens who would remain part of the State of Israel and them having equal and full rights within that state.
One quick last question, Nasim. What's behind the current ceasefire? There seems to be a sort of semi-armed negotiation unofficially declared going on. Is that?
What's behind it? My suspicion is that Israel, Netanyahu finds himself in a corner now. There's been massive losses within the Israeli army. There's been 1,600 to 1,700 Israeli soldiers who have been wounded quite severely. So I think in his own country, in Israel, Netanyahu sees that there's a shift within Israel. And also I think just the international response to the murderous bombardment of Gaza. So I think the war has not developed the way he anticipated. I think there's been a backlash, and that's why I think Israel wants the reconciliation more than ceasefire, more than Hamas, it seems like.
Is that how your take on it, Ben?
I think I probably largely agree with that. I mean, it's difficult at the moment. We don't know what terms are on the table and what's going to be accepted. But certainly I think Israel, it's certainly lost the media war. It's lost the battle for public opinion, not just within the UK, across Europe, across the world. Look at what's happening in South America. Look at the reaction of various governments in South America. It hasn't translated into real pressure on Israel from the key Western governments, but certainly I think Israel ought to be worried about what's happened in terms of public opinion across the world.
OK, well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for on tonight's programme. I want to thank all of my guests on the show, Paul Schultz, Dr. Ebwer Fattah, Michael Serkan-Daventry and Ben Jamal and Nasim Ahmed. And thank you at home for watching. Remember, you can keep up with what we've been talking about on a Twitter conversation by looking at the @Islam channel Twitter feed and using the hashtag #TheReport. Well, we're back tomorrow evening, same time. So until then, good night from all of us here. Thanks a lot.